From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Psychiatry Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Psychiatry.
Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to the JAMA Psychiatry Author Interview podcast. I'm your host and web editor, Dr. John Torres. Today we're thrilled to be discussing a new paper just out in JAMA Psychiatry, The Reinforcement Effect of Social Media Likes in Depression. We're about to talk with the corresponding author, Dr. Dan Michamira from Princeton Neuroscience Institute and Department of Psychology at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey, USA. We have all seen intense public concern about how social media impacts mental health, and yet the research literature remains inconclusive. Some reviews link heavy social media use to worse mental health, others find positive effects, and many reviews find minimal to no effect at all. Part of the problem is methodological. Most studies rely on how people report and self-report they use social media, and often treat social media like a single monolithic thing. This new study takes a different approach. Rather than asking how much people think they use social media, it asks how their behavior is shaped by the rewards social media delivers, think about the likes, and whether that process works differently in people with or without depression. So to learn more, we're about to talk to the corresponding author of this paper just published in JAMA Psychiatry. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Mira. And to set the stage, there's been an explosion of research on social media and mental health, and yet the field is often described as inconclusive. Why is this? What are the core limitations, and what did it make you want to do differently in the research you're going to tell us about?
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here on this podcast. So yeah, indeed, there are a few core limitations that we try to address with this work. The first is, as you kind of alluded in your intro, there's been this overemphasis on overall screen time, so how much time people generally spend on social media, and much less regard to like how people use social media. And then the second is, even when looking at how people use social media, for example, there's distinctions between active use, which is posting or messaging, and passive use, which is things like consuming content. Even then, the measuring of this use is done through self-report by and large. Even though we know that self-report doesn't really correlate that much with actual behavior, even outside social media. And then the third thing is, and something that we've been really passionate about is coming from the psychology side, is there's been like relatively little grounding in psychology. So not as much work has looked at how specific features of social media interact with psychological processes or psychological traits in different ways. And so we wanted to address these limitations by focusing on a specific feature, these social rewards like likes, looking at the psychological process that these features engage, so reinforcement learning, and then also quantifying this process directly from posting behavior.
So to summarize, we're saying, look, prior social media research has been exciting, but a lot of this based on self-report. We had this idea of active versus passive use, but it's not quite as accurate as we want. And a lot of the research is interesting, but not grounded in psychology. So you guys are going to do it a little bit differently. And you alluded to this, but your study brings a reinforcement learning lens to social media. Can you explain the basic idea of how social rewards like likes may reinforce posting in different individuals, or help us understand what is the psychology lens you're bringing to the social media space?
So reinforcement learning is this very powerful computational framework that explains how humans and animals learn from feedback. So the basic idea is that obtaining a reward, so something kind of good that happens to you, will reinforce the behavior that led to that reward. Think of maybe most basic level, a mouse in a box that kind of wanders around, stumbles across a lever, presses the lever, and gets a food pellet, right? What that food pellet will do is reinforce the behavior that led to it. So really the mouse will be more likely to kind of go straight to the lever and press it next time. So similarly, you can think of posting on social media as kind of pressing a lever. Only instead of food, you get these digital social rewards like likes, comments, or followers, and that are really designed to mimic things like social approval or praise, right? And because social approval feels good and motivates our behavior, then there is theoretically, and there's also evidence that there is this reinforcement learning going on. And there's at least two types of reinforcement learning happening. So one, you can think of people learning what kind of content to post in order to get the most rewards. And the second is learning how much it's worth posting. And that's kind of what we were focusing on here. So the basic idea is that the more reward you're getting, the more it's worth posting over doing other things, for example, right? And so we wanted to get a measure of how the extent to which getting more likes leads to more posting.
No, that makes sense. And next time I click a like on social media, I'll try to remember, am I doing what an animal is doing in a cage? Getting at pellets. It's a good analogy. But back to this fascinating paper. So again, you kind of began to mention, but computational psychiatry has generally linked depression to blunted or reduced reward learning, right? A depressed rat in this analogy is going to go and push the lever less and get less pellets. Given prior work, we're saying again, depression is usually about blunted affect and blunted reward learning. What would you have predicted around depression and social media use for likes?
So our prediction going into this work was that people with depression would be less reinforced by these likes. So they would sort of change their posting less in response to how much likes they're getting. And that really is based on literature from lab studies where, for example, if a person with depression doing a task where they have to learn which of two squares to choose to maximize reward, they seem to not really respond as strongly to reward and not value rewards as much. But really, in a task, the rewards are things like points, a few points on a screen that maybe then translate to a bonus of a few cents. So really very small and potentially meaningless for a lot of people, right? Whereas in the real world, the rewards that motivate our behavior are meaningful and also they're very often social, right? So I mentioned approval and praise. These are things that we encounter every day in a lot of aspects of life. So we really wanted to see, do these predictions from the lab, from computational psychiatry, generalize to real world behavior in response to these very meaningful social rewards on social media, which I think is a very important step in order to bring findings from the lab to the real world.
And at the risk of sounding ridiculous, people are not mice, and people in the lab doing an experiment are not always the same as people in the real world posting on social media. And you're saying, look, we're worried about people posting on social media today. So let's look at those people. Makes perfect sense. And in the paper, you estimate what you call reinforcement tendency as the influence of the previous day's likes on the next day's posting. Can you walk us through a little bit about what this is and why we're using this idea of reinforcement tendency and against how likes on the last day influence the next day?
Exactly. So we were trying to get a measure, a behavioral signature of reinforcement learning without really the necessity to fit a full computational model because it's more difficult to do that in the real world. So we wanted to start with this behavioral signature. And after some iterations, some thinking, we settled on exactly what you described. So essentially, we took on each day and we defined days sort of relative to each person. We took on each day the average number of likes that they got per post, and we looked at the effect that that had on the number of posts they made on the next day. So really, and we fit this statistical model that allowed us to get person-specific estimates. So for each person, we could estimate the extent to which likes reinforce posting. Because if the value of that estimate, the coefficient is positive, it means that if you get more likes, you're going to post more. So it's really this tendency to be reinforced, which we call reinforcement tendency.
I know the paper has some very impressive methods used. We won't go into them on the podcast, but I encourage everyone to download and read the paper. It's quite amazing, and the figures are also very impressive. But we're almost about to talk about these fasting results, but you actually used in this 3 different data sets of different recruitment strategies and even different measures of depression. We don't have to go into details of all the data sets, but why did it matter to use different data sets? And briefly, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what they are.
So yeah, we used 3 different data sets. I first started off with this fully scraped data set using something called the API that Twitter used to have. So these are all Twitter data sets.
Okay.
The first one, I basically went and looked for people that disclosed a diagnosis of depression on Twitter. So fully without recruiting participants, just went, got this group of depressed users, and then got a random group of users for comparison. And then, of course, there's some limitations with this. People who post about their depression diagnosis might not be representative of all people with depression. So we wanted to, on the one hand, get better measures of depression, but also just replicate our findings in general, right? So then we leveraged two other data sets which had recruited participants that self-reported their level of depression. And dataset 3 was better than dataset 2. So in dataset 3, we had a full kind of psychometrically valid measure, whereas in dataset 1, it was just like a one-item measure. And across all the data sets, we repeated all our analyses, and it was important to guide of both tests how much they replicate, but also given that the data sets were quite different measures, and also because this is explained in the paper and the supplement, but because of how we recruited, there were differences in how engaged people were on average with posting and on Twitter. So really pretty different data sets, and we really wanted to see, is our effect robust to these differences? Does it generalize to kind of different types of different levels of engagement, different types of, and different depression measures?
So again, we'd use 3 different data sets where we're going to kind of look at, does likes and getting this reinforcement for likes influence how people use social media next day? So let's jump to the central result. Across these 3 data sets, what did you find about the relationship between depression and a tendency to be reinforced by these social media likes?
To our surprise, we actually found the opposite of what we expected.
The opposite. Interesting.
The opposite. So remember, we expected this blunted reinforcement tendency, so less responses to rewards. We found that people with depression actually tended more to be reinforced by likes across all the data sets.
So more depression, even though classically blunted reward learning, here we see the opposite.
Yes, exactly. And again, it was kind of like a repeated replication. So we did it on dataset 1. We were kind of like, okay, we did it on dataset 2. We found it again. And then on dataset 3, we were like, okay, we have enough evidence now. We can pre-register the same effect. And then we found the same things. In the paper, we go through a bunch of controls and other analyses. But really, this is the take-home message that people with depression tended more to be reinforced by likes, who tended more to increase their posting when they got more likes.
So how do we reconcile this with like classic psychological theory and doctrine of people with depression have reduced reward sensitivity and learning? And here you're saying it's the opposite. How do these fit?
Yeah, they do seem quite contrary, right? At least on first glance. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. So I think the results might signal this difference between lab environments and real world environments. And the kind of biggest piece of evidence for that is that previously a similar thing has been found in the study of emotional reactivity. So people with depression respond less strongly to stimuli in the lab emotionally, but then when you look at them in the real world, they respond more strongly to daily events happening to them in the real life. And I think we don't go that much into this in the paper, but I think one possibility that I've been thinking of that can reconcile these is that depression comes with this sort of selective attunement to personally meaningful rewards. So right, overweight, you become more sensitive to these personally meaningful rewards, and you downweight the less meaningful small rewards. So it's not really that it's one or the other, it's that there's this selectivity. And then there could also be something specifically about social media, because it might be that people with depression use social media as a way to compensate for the lack of social rewards in other domains. So that might also make them value these rewards more because they're compensating.
In the paper, you and the team are careful to say this is a correlational study. These are things we can't answer. But could you lay out some maybe causal possibilities and what type of study you would want to do in the future to explore those?
So there's a few possibilities, right? The first, and I think the more running, or at least when I just explained depression comes with this, the first possibility is that depression really causes and leads to people being more sensitive to personally meaningful, maybe social rewards, maybe rewards on social media. The other possibility is the opposite, right? Could be that if you're more sensitive to social media rewards, that could lead to depressive symptoms in the future. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of third variables causing both. So one possible one is social isolation or social connection that could relate. There might be a kind of broader network of things relating and not a direct causal link. And of course, this is a cross-sectional study. In the depression measure, we only had one depression measure. So we really need longitudinal and experimental studies. So for a longitudinal study, you can look at over time, does reinforcement tendency predict depression or vice versa? And actually, there is a very recent preprint that showed evidence of the former. So basically, people with heightened reinforcement tendency had increased depressive symptoms a year later. There's a bit of early evidence on that. Still not fully causal. For that, we need experiments. So one thing that we've been wanting to do is manipulate reward sensitivity directly. So it turns out it's hard to do. I mean, one idea is to use kind of an educational intervention to teach people about what reward sensitivity is and to try to decrease that. But really, you can also look more low level at what the rewards are doing to mental health. So you can manipulate things like the availability of rewards. So you can turn off notifications for rewards or try to hide the count. And this is actually something we're doing right now in a study with Instagram data.
These are fascinating things to study. And we're getting to the point of a lot of the current research on social media has not answered the question. We really don't want to base our science off only cross-sectional data. And I think the field has to move towards these more rigorous and just impactful and innovative designs. So it's exciting to hear these possibilities. Clearly, as you again say in the paper, the effects that you find here are small. But in the paper, you and the team also argue small effects, when amplified by millions of people, especially young people on social media, are very important. Can you quickly make that case again? Because I think we want people to understand the context fully.
So I think the argument we were making is that essentially, if you think of how many people use social media, I think it's 2 in 3 people around the world. Then let's say it's true that, for example, heightened reinforcement tendency can maybe contribute to depressive symptoms. Given the scale, even a small increase in reinforcement tendency could have public health impacts through increasing depressive symptoms, right? So it might be worth intervening on, although that's kind of another question. The other thing to say is that I don't think if we are looking for large effects in something like psychopathology, we're not going to find them, right? Like we know that a lot of psychopathology, depression has a lot of different causes. So I think it is going to be cumulative small effects, especially in the real world. And here we're really looking at like behavior and a digital behavior, which is really noisy. And I think really my suspicion is that underneath this noise, there's a like larger ground truth effect. And I think it's really comforting to see that it was, even if it's so small, it was robust and generalizable, and we could still detect it across multiple data sets.
And with those very fair caveats, what should clinicians take from this new research? Should it change how we talk to patients about depression in social media? Is it too early?
I love that question. I do think with small effects, it's hard to form very targeted implications and like guidelines for clinicians. But I do think in general, I hope someone reading this and that who maybe was thinking more in these broad strokes of screen time, how people spending time on social media affects their mental health. I hope now they're thinking more that actually there's more nuance to that. You know, there's psychological processes like reinforcement learning that interact with features of social media, and that could really potentially explain some of the effects. And, you know, it could be like when talking to someone, that could be something that, you know, like their perception of how they respond to things like social rewards could be something that could be included in the conversation. I'm not a clinician myself, so I feel too informed to talk about that, but I hope it just adds a bit more thinking about these processes.
And I mean, I'll say as a clinician, I think we know that people, as you said, spend a lot of time on social media. It's a digital environment they're immersed in. There can be risks and benefits. We have to ask people. We say, what do you do on social media? Do you like it? We can start conversations, even if we don't have all the answers. And papers like yours really help us have more informed conversations and point out something is going on here, but it's not going to be as directly simple. And we're getting some clues from your paper about using likes. My last question, and this is a big one, so we'll only touch the surface. We're clearly in the era of AI, and there's many AI-driven social media feeds that can be engineered to just drive engagement, bring things that people want to click likes for. What do your results maybe warn or tell us about what we have to look for, what's coming with AI and social media? A hard question, but we'll just touch the surface.
It is a hard question. It's a very interesting one. So, the first thing I'm thinking of, and it's not as new, I'm thinking of personalization algorithms, right? And I think that's basically that social media has gone more from the realm of I just post, my friends see my post, to there's this algorithm that just measures how engaging my posts are and then produces this super, super variable and skewed reward schedule where there's a very small chance that I'll get really viral and I'll get all this social reward. Then most of the time I won't. And I think that theory would predict that that's kind of keeps people engaged. There's this intermittent reinforcement. So you want to use it more. But I think on the emotional side, we have, again, theoretically, there's reasons to think that that's bad for our mood because you're like disappointed all the time, right? This is actually something we're looking at in this Instagram study as well. Could this skewed reward schedules be the reason why something like heightened reinforcement tendency, like if you care about these likes, right? It might be that you're more emotionally impacted by their fluctuations as well. And so that might really explain why we see this link to depression. I think it's really early, but it could be that really at the core of it is really these algorithms. And it would look very different if the way social media platforms showed our content and allowed us to give social rewards to each other could look very different.
This is the research that can help us actually make impactful changes and make social media safer and better for everyone. So thank you so much for talking and sharing. And again, I encourage everyone to look at the paper. There's so much more there. But to conclude, I'm Dr. John Torres. I've been speaking with Dr. Dan Mirchamira about the reinforcement effect of social media likes in depression. You can find a link to the article in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.